you didn't know it already, Kia is betting big on crossovers, and they have not one, not two, but three entries in the hottest segment in America, the subcompact crossover segment. This is the latest. It's the 2024 Kia Seltos, and for this model year, they've refreshed the exterior, the interior, and even given us some changes under the hood. Let's take a look. Visually, the big change happens up front, where we find the latest interpretation of Kia's Tiger Nose grille, although it's looking a little less Tiger Nosy in this generation than before. We have LED headlights. These are now projector LED headlights. They really give it a sleek, cool look. And specifically, these headlights remind me a bit of what we find in some Land Rover models. Definitely a good thing when we're talking about a vehicle that starts at about $25,000. Some of the trims also have this LED accent strip that integrates that into the flowing grille lines there. We have what they're calling skid plates up front, but they're just plastic. This is a visual appearance package. This is not intended for the kind of off-roading that you'd want to do in, say, a Bronco Sport. Down here we have the turn signals and then LED fog lights stacked vertically on the side. Dimensionally, the Seltos slots right between the Soul and the Niro in Kia's lineup. It's obviously a little bit less boxy and less upright than the Soul, and it doesn't have the aero blade thing going on in the back like we find in the Niro. Rather than scaled models, which would be really weird in Kia's lineup since there are 9 crossovers to choose from, Kia decided to give every vehicle more of a unique flavor. Also, all-wheel drive is the big reason you'd want this. When you take a look at the sales charts, Kia sells a ton of small crossovers and small hatches in America. It's just that they spread them across a ton of different models. Be sure and let me know what you think of the style of the new Seltos in the comment section. I think this is one of the most attractive small crossovers we have in America, and they've fixed some of the things I didn't really care for in the previous generation Seltos. The hatch was a little bit boring. It had that chrome bar running right across the back. Instead, we now have a more modern red bar running back there. Partial LED rear tail lights, so the turn signals do appear to be incandescents. And then we have reflectors down here along with the backup lights. This is probably the only design cue that reminds me of another Kia model. It's just these really simple elements down there. Everything else is solidly differentiated from the other vehicles in Kia's own lineup, like the Sportage or the smaller Soul or the other models that I am totally spacing on right now because, again, there are so many different Kias with hatches to choose from. Another really cool touchback here is the way they've integrated the roof rails, which are optional on the Seltos, but if you get them, they have a really interesting aero pinch that kind of matches what's going on here with the shark's fin. Under the hood, we find your choice of 2 different engines. The base models come with a 2-liter 4-cylinder naturally aspirated engine. It produces 146 horsepower, and it's mated to a continuously variable automatic transmission. You can get that one with front-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, and there's actually an extra front-wheel drive model to choose from this year that didn't exist before. That's going to give you the best fuel economy, 29 or 31 miles per gallon combined, depending on whether you choose that front-wheel drive or all-wheel drive option box. The engine and transmission are essentially the same as the 2023 Seltos, but they have tweaked the software in the transmission. The bigger change happens in the upper-end trims. We get a 1.6-liter turbocharged engine with more power, 195 horsepower, 195 pound-feet of torque, but also a new automatic transmission. Last time they gave us a 7-speed dual clutch. It was somewhat controversial. I liked it, but apparently a lot of folks didn't. So instead we now have an 8-speed automatic transmission. That means that 0 to 60 times are about the same as before, even though we get the extra power, but the experience is considerably smoother. Talking about 0 to 60, this model should be good for sub 8-second runs 0 to 60 at sea level. The naturally aspirated 146 horsepower model, it's going to be in the 8.5 to 9-second range depending on the version you get. The front-wheel drive version is going to be the fastest 0 to 60 in addition to being the most efficient. And speaking of efficiency, the one downside to the traditional 8-speed automatic transmission is you get a few miles per gallon less out on the highway and 1 less on the combined cycle, 26 mpg for this one. Some folks might be disappointed by that, but if you take a look at, for instance, the Jeep Compass, it's definitely going to be less efficient than this, even though you only get 5 more horsepower. Bearing in mind that I haven't spent a full day behind the wheel of the new Seltos just yet, I found the driver's seat to be pretty comfortable. We have a tilt telescopic steering column with a decent range of motion. This trim has a power adjustable driver's seat with a 2-way power lumbar support, but even in this top-end trim, the passenger seat remains a manual design. If you're interested in a lot of headroom, this does have a boxy profile, and you can get the SX trim like I'm in without a power moonroof. So in this model, even with the seat not all the way down, I still have about 4 inches of headroom left. So if you're a taller driver or you frequently have a taller front passenger in, you certainly want to take a look at the Seltos. One thing that we've seen in Kia and Hyundai designs for a while is that the front seat tracks do move quite a bit further rearward than average, so taller folks shouldn't have any problem up here. When you hop in the back, you'll really notice those longer seat tracks. This front seat's all the way back in its tracks. I have about an inch maybe of legroom left. That would certainly be suitable for a taller driver or front passenger. As far as combined legroom goes, we have just under 80 inches of combined legroom in here, significantly more than you'll find in the Corolla Cross. And that's more obvious if I scoot over here to this side, where the driver's seat's adjusted for me. I have maybe about 4 inches of legroom left. This is one of the few subcompact crossovers where if you're maybe 5'10", you could squeeze a rear-facing child seat in the back behind that driver, although it is going to be a little bit tight for some of those larger child seats. The rear seats have a 60-40 folding design, but as you can see, they aren't going to fold with that seat all the way back. In addition to being roomy, the Seltos is also positioned as a more premium option in this segment. So we find rear seat air vents, something you don't find in any version of the Crosstrek in this generation, and USB-C charge points down below. Behind the manual hatch that we find in this model, or the optional power hatch, which is available in the Seltos, we find just over 26 cubic feet of cargo space. So not quite enough to leave your 22-inch roller bag in the vertical position, but certainly lots of room to have them in this position back here. This cargo area is a little bit squarer than some of the options, certainly squarer than what we find in the Crosstrek, but we have one of these hard style cargo covers. This is not my preference. Let's see if we can store it under the load floor. This is kind of a pet peeve of mine, vehicles that have one of these and don't give you any place to store it. But actually Kia manages to go through that challenge. You can toss that under the load floor. That's obviously a practical touch, but there's some other cool stuff going on down here. If we pull that cargo cover out, you'll notice we have a 2-stage load floor, so we can drop that down, get even more cargo room out of this vehicle. And that's where we could put those larger 22-inch roller bags completely underneath the rear seat headrests. And if you'll notice, there's also a rarity, a unicorn hiding under here, a spare tire. If the load floor is in this position, clearly the temporary spare is all that would fit, but if you didn't care about that, you could squeak a full-size spare in there under the load floor in the upper position. As we look around the interior, keep in mind this is an SX trim, but it is not a fully loaded model, so we don't have things like the power tailgate, ventilated seats, or the optional moonroof. The obvious advantage to this configuration choice is that we get more front seat and rear seat headroom, so a definitely roomier interior feel than you'd get in a model where you had to get the sunroof in the top-end trims. We have height adjustable shoulder belts and height adjustable headrests for the driver and front passenger. The fully loaded Seltos would also get ventilated seats, but even in this model where they're just heated, we still have perforations in the center upholstery section, moderate bolstering on the seat back, and not a lot going down there on the seat bottom cushion, so larger drivers shouldn't have too much of a problem getting comfortable in here. As you'd expect in a small crossover, there's a mixture of materials going on the front doors, soft touch materials on the middle, harder plastics at the top and at the bottom of the door. The door design and the dashboard design has definitely been changed for 2024. Let me know what you think. I do love this dual screen design, which is the most obvious thing you're going to see in here. The big dual screen setup running right across there, and then the revised dashboard and door connecting to it right there. The SX trim we're taking a look at has a stitched insert in the middle of the dashboard, but we still have the same hard plastic upper and hard plastic lower you find in the base model. The glove compartment is a bin style design. You could fit maybe a 9-inch tablet computer inside, but my 11-inch tablet would not fit in there. It was close, however. Moving up to the dashboard, we have, again, the big dual screen setup. If you choose the base model, then we get a smaller 8-inch LCD over here and a much smaller 4-inch LCD in the middle, but we still have this large, expansive piece of plastic running across the dashboard. So it gives it a very similar look, but obviously with smaller screens. This features Apple CarPlay and Android Auto integration. It has the same native interface we find in a whole lot of other Kia models, but we do not have wireless CarPlay with this particular screen setup. For some reason, in the Hyundai lineup and Kia lineup, we only find wireless CarPlay in the smaller screens. Keyless start is something that you don't find in the base model, but at least Kia changes around the steering column. So we don't get the same steering column with just a button in there. They integrate it more nicely into the dashboard. We have single zone automatic climate control here, some physical controls for that infotainment setup, Qi wireless charging mat on a second level right here. That's kind of a nice touch. Then we have USB ports down there, one USB input for the system, one USB charge only port, large additional storage area there. Pretty traditional console shifter over here. If you got the ventilated seat option, that's where you'd find the buttons down here. We have the drive mode selector right there, a lock mode for the center coupling in this all-wheel drive system. And you'll notice we have a sport mode over here that's a manual shift mode as well. Down here, we have the electric parking brake, auto brake hold, two big cup holders, padded center armrest, and a reasonable amount of storage space under it. The optional full LCD instrument cluster offers 4 different design themes. They can be either linked with the drive mode or they can be selected independently via the infotainment screen. This is my favorite. Let me know which you like, but none of them are going to offer a moving map display. So the software is a little bit more basic than you'd find in a luxury segment vehicle. Moving out from there, we have a 3-spoke steering wheel with a flat bottom, pretty decent sport grips up top. Leather wrapped is optional. We have the controls for the infotainment system over here, controls for the adaptive cruise control, lane centering, and that multifunction LCD cluster over there on the right side. The Seltos is really trying to be one of the most premium entries in this segment. So this is the very top-end SX trim. We do have the pretty standard-sized moonroof just over the driver and front passengers' heads right there. This model also has the power tailgate and the ventilated front seats. You'll notice that the perforation pattern is the same as the one we were looking at earlier, but we get this sort of baseball glove brown leather. This is a really attractive interior color. You can also get a lighter gray interior and a very sort of a gray-green interior. I'll post a photo in here. This is not actually gray, it's actually sort of a gray-green. It does have an interesting look to it. I like this brown interior the most, however. It really dresses up the interior, giving you more contrast between the still hard dashboard components, but the stitched bit in the middle right there and the black below. You notice that the rest of the interior is basically the same, but this upper level package adds the seat ventilation option for the front seats. We also have a button here for the backup camera. That is not a 360-degree camera button. It is just a backup camera button. The two-tone theme continues in the back where we have those brown armrests on the black door. We have the brown seat trim around there, but on the backs of the front seats, this is actually a hard plastic area there. No seat pocket on the driver's side back seat, but we do have one over there on the front passenger side. If you have young children, this is actually a benefit because it won't be rubbing on the upholstery. They'll actually have that plastic backing right there. Then you can see that we have the same sort of perforations on these seat cushions that we find up front, and then the charcoal seat belts. Driving out here with me in Rhode Island is my good buddy Tommy from TFL, so be sure and head over to his video review of the Seltos if you want to know a slightly different take, and a take all in one continuous stream of talking, right?
Well, thank you, Alex. I appreciate you having me on your channel, and I'm excited to talk about the Seltos.
Yes, are you excited about the Seltos, or are you excited to talk about the Seltos?
You know, I think that this is a fairly minor refresh, as refreshes go. I think they've changed some good things mechanically, but cosmetically, it looks pretty similar, I think, at least to most people.
Yeah, it does. It's pretty similar, but I like the changes, and I think that the changes, the relatively small changes they did were actually pretty big, especially if you wanted the turbo model. Let's talk about that first. So we do get 20 more horsepower. 0 to 60, though, seems to be about the same as before because we have that new 8-speed automatic instead of the DCT.
But what do you think, Alex, with that slight sacrifice in fuel economy? Is a Seltos buyer going to be excited about the change, or are they going to be a little bit upset about that decrease in the efficiency?
I think most folks will like it, and here's why. Because if we just come to a stop here and we start off again really slow, this whole thing feels very normative. It feels very much like everybody else's automatic. And the DCT, all DCTs really, they have that herky-jerky thing in stop and go and slow and go traffic up steep hills. If you did want to take it on a mild off-road trail, you would definitely notice the difference with the DCT. And this just removes all of that concern and that complaint.
I agree completely, and I'm excited to see how this transmission lasts in the long term as well with the torque converter.
Indeed, yeah. And performance feels pretty good. Like, obviously this is not a 0 to 60 run here because we can't go 60 on this road, but you'll definitely notice that the performance feels very normal. The shifts are all pretty crisp for an 8-speed automatic. Not dual clutch fast, but everything feels very, very smooth. And I'd say that's pretty much, it really explains everything about the Seltos. It feels smoother than some of those firm options.
Now, they did say they changed some mechanical differences to this Gamma engine, so it's not just software. They talked about injectors, they talked about some valve train stuff, they talked about turbo. It still feels pretty similar in the way it delivers power. You get like a big chunk of torque kind of right in the power band, right in the middle of the RPM range.
Yeah, 200 pound-feet, which is definitely healthy.
Yeah, pretty good. And how does this compare to vehicles like the Corolla Cross, like the Crosstrek, that are naturally aspirated only?
Yeah, that's a good point, I think. It definitely has a different personality. You know, I like the personality of a turbo. Do you like turbos, like generally speaking? Are you more of a turbo or a naturally aspirated person?
Well, I live up at elevation in Colorado, so I'm a big turbo fan because it really helps recapture some of those performance losses that you find in an NA engine. And yeah, for someone in this class, I think that the average Seltos buyer may not really notice a difference between an NA and a turbo, except that this feels quicker. Yeah. So I think it's a good option.
The big thing you'll probably notice is, it doesn't have to downshift as much.
Yeah, good point. That's a really good point. One thing I do notice, at higher speeds, it does downshift a little bit more slowly, it feels like.
That's true.
Than the dual clutch. But once again...
So right now we're, 40 miles an hour if I floor it. takes a while for it to get moving.
Yeah.
That's definitely a little slower than before. But then the base model has a CVT. So this is one of the few entries in this segment that A, has an option other than a CVT, and gives you more power. Because oddly enough, we don't really get this much power in any version of the Crosstrek, the bestseller. No version escapes the CVT. They're all going to be CVT. Same with the Corolla Cross. You get the hybrid with the CVT-like planetary thing, or an actual CVT in the regular Corolla Cross.
That is one thing I wish that maybe Kia had explored a little bit more in this segment, is a hybrid or a PHEV.
Yeah, I agree with that one. Their logic would be, if you want something almost exactly this size with 50 miles per gallon, we have the Niro, but there's no all-wheel drive in the Niro, and I would be willing to give up 10 miles per gallon easy to just get this all-wheel drive thingy with that hybrid system. That would have been pretty cool.
Now, one interesting thing we were talking about a little bit off camera is the pricing on this model. Means that if you look at the range from like the mid-20s to the low 30s, there are, what, we said 5 other?
Four others. There are 5 total Kias in this price range. I get 5 if you count, like, the sedans or regular hatches. But
so, yeah. I mean, what is the advantage of buying a mid-range Seltos over maybe like an entry-level Sportage or something like that?
Yeah, that is, I'm still scratching my head on that one in some respects, because we get basically the same drivetrains in the Soul, which is in the price range of this. You do get something different in the Niro. Of course, you get the hybrid system, but you also get a 1.6-liter turbo in the Sportage.
Right.
And you get a 1.6-liter turbo hybrid system available in the Sorento. Those are all in the same price range as this. Obviously not the hybrid ones, those are a bit more. But performance is going to be shockingly similar, really, in all of the Kias that are in this same sort of $28,000 to $30,000 range.
Now, speaking of performance, I think that Kia's done a really good job with the ride quality on this car. And I think the overall NVH feels pretty good.
Yeah, it definitely has been improved. They said they added some extra sound deadening, so that's definitely noticeable in here. Pretty smooth ride quality. This one has 235 with tires. Only the 1.6-liter turbo gets the 235s. Everything else is getting slightly skinnier tires. So logically, handling and stopping distances are going to be better in here. You can try an abrupt stop. Are you ready to hold on?
Yep.
Let's see how it goes. Oh, that's
pretty good.
That is strangely grippy. Lots of tire squeal there with the 235. So I wouldn't be surprised, again, keeping in mind the curb weight of this, which is on the lighter side versus a hybrid Niro. I wouldn't be surprised if this was one of the shorter stopping entries in this segment. It's pretty unusual for a subcompact vehicle here to have 235s.
One thing they are introducing in 2024 is the X line.
Yes.
Right, and they talked about, well, they talked about skid plates. I would describe them more as trim panels.
Trim panels, yes.
Right. So Kia's really diving deep into kind of this adventurous persona, but we're still talking about a car that has 7.3 inches of ground clearance.
Yeah.
Right. If you want to take your crossover off road, Compass Trailhawk, Bronco Sport,
definitely
on the higher end, right?
And then, of course, we have the new Subaru Wilderness, which is going to be below those in capability, but still above average with all-terrain tires from the factory and actual skid plates. But this, I think, is an interesting option for someone that maybe wants extra snow traction, etc., or the extra power, because that is the weird twist with the X-Line. You give up some interior creature comforts, but you get the turbo and the wider tires.
Right.
So that's kind of a interesting sidestep there. No all-terrains, no aggressive anythings there, no extra ground clearance, but you get a little bit of extra style.
Now, in this new model, we do have some improved features or new features like the power lift gate. Anything you think that Kia has really added that if you're a 2021 or 2022 or 2023 Seltos owner that would cause you to upgrade to the 24?
Ooh, I don't think so, really. I mean, if you really hate the way your DCT shifts, then this is not going to feel like that.
Yeah.
But additive features, I don't think there's really anything, earth-shattering going on here. We do have the new 2-screen setup there in the dashboard that I showed everybody earlier, and I do like that. That's one of the best things that Kia and Hyundai have done. This is definitely a solid reason to get this over everything else in the segment. Only something like the Compass will have big screens in the dash, but it's going to be $10,000 more than this for that top-end Compass I last drove, so significantly less expensive with this 2-screen deal going on here. And you can actually get this one in the S trim is where it is standard. So the 2 big things for about $25,000. It's a really good deal.
It is a really good deal. Now, where do you kind of rank this car in the hierarchy of the smallish crossover?
Oh, that is a tricky one. I have to preface this by saying there's so many of them, and most of them are really solid. The ones that stand out to me in this segment as not my favorites is probably an easier place to go.
Yep.
And that would just be, again, nothing wrong with them. Like HRV, I think is kind of boring. It style-wise is boring. It's a little bit boring to drive. There's nothing standout-ish about it. And this tends to be more standouty, both in terms of style. I like the exterior, the 2-screen doodads there, the fact that you can get the 1.6-liter turbo for a lot less than the turbocharged engines in the competition. I do like the Bronco Sport. It is very capable. In fact, it's the most capable entry right now if you want to do that. But
a lot more expensive.
Yeah, a lot more expensive. Yeah, those Heritage trims can get up to $48,000. I mean, for that price, you could get a whole lot of other things, including, you know, a cheap Wrangler. Lots of options out there. What are your favorites?
Well, I really did like the Corolla Cross Hybrid we were in.
I agree.
Pretty recently. I thought that was a really attractive offering. Kona, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kona's seeing some pretty significant improvements.
Yeah. I like this style better than the Kona, though, for me.
I do too.
The front end. That one looks a little bit kind of like the Buick.
Yeah. The one I haven't spent any time in is the new Trax.
Mm-hmm. Yep. The new Trax is fantastic.
Is it?
I really like it, but it's not quite this. It's more of a sole competitor because it's just a front-wheel drive hatch. It is very inexpensive.
And then I think the bottom of the list for me in this segment would be like the Taos, the Volkswagen.
Yeah, the Taos is solid. It's just not exciting.
So I think this is certainly near the top for me.
What would you get instead of this? What would be your pick?
I mean, I do like the Kona a lot, and they're so similar in so many ways.
The Hyundai Kia conglomerate thanks you for picking one brother over its sister. Yeah.
My big downside, we talked about it a little bit, but 26 mpg combined.
Yeah.
You know, you do take a hit with that turbo, big hit.
But it is better than Bronco Sport or Compass in their 200 horsepower equivalent models.
That's true.
Good.
Yeah, that's true. I'd still love a hybrid version.
Yes.
Just kind of nitpicking here. And I would, this is just really picky, but I would love to have lumbar control on the passenger side.
Yes. And if you want that, you could get a Compass. But that last Compass we drove was 44,000, I think, that we had. So that is a little spendy, but I agree that some of those features I wish were included. This one doesn't have the sunroof, so it could get a little bit more expensive than the one that we're driving. Sunroof, power hatch in the back, ventilated seats, but no power seat for you.
Interesting,
Sorry.
right?
Yeah. With a price range that spans from $25,715 to $32,515, including destination, the Seltos has a much narrower pricing range than something like a Bronco Sport, but also narrower than a decent number of core competitors to this. Something like the Subaru Crosstrek, it starts a little bit more than this at $26,290 and should go up to about $35,000 fully loaded for the upcoming Wilderness trim. The Honda HR-V, it also has a narrow pricing range. It ends up a little bit less expensive than this, but it doesn't offer things like the turbocharged engine or an interior that is as nice as this. Toyota's Corolla Cross is likely going to be one of the best sellers in this segment this year. Its price tag spans from $24,945 on up to about $36,000, but you do get that nearly 50 mile per gallon hybrid system, which is fantastic. Now, if I were spending money in this segment, I have to admit, I would put the Seltos over all three of those options. I would buy it over the Crosstrek because I like the look more. The Crosstrek does come across as a little bit boring. Also, no turbocharged engine under the hood. It does have about 180 some odd horsepower, but it's not going to perform like this, and it's going to have that CVT, which is not exactly my preference. The all-wheel drive setup that we find in the Crosstrek also is not as willing to send as much power to the rear axle as the system that Kia tends to use. It's just their choice for fuel economy in that model. The Corolla Cross, it's also a little bit boring if I'm honest. The fuel economy is absolutely fantastic, and that is reason alone to get it, but its all-wheel drive setup is not going to be as off-road capable as this, and this is obviously not an off-road vehicle, but if you do want to go a little bit further down that trailhead at the national park, this is definitely going to get you there. We do, of course, have a higher roof line than we find in the Crosstrek. Some folks might not like that, especially if you're shorter than I am. It's going to be more difficult to get things like kayaks or bicycles or things like that up on the roof. But in reality, I think the biggest competition for this comes from Kia's own lineup. We have the Soul, which starts at $19,898, the Niro at $26,600, the Sportage at $26,300, and the Sorento at $30,000. So we have 4 Kia crossovers in the same pricing range as this Seltos. 5 vehicles total from the same brand. And I think that's why Kia is not on the top sales charts anymore, because there are just so many options to choose from. When you add them all together, they sell very well, but there's just more selection and more variation available. If you really want something that's boxier, that's going to be the Soul. You actually have very similar kinds of interior room in a smaller package because it's boxier. We have the Niro if you want over 50 miles per gallon. We have the Sportage if you want a little bit more power or a hybrid or a plug-in hybrid system. Then we have the Sorento if you'd rather have 3 rows. Really tricky decisions, all in the same pricing range. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section. And instead of maybe telling me whether you'd like the Crosstrek or Corolla Cross, which of the 5 Kia options for about $31,000 would you like to have in your driveway? For me, I think the Seltos is a really great package, but I have to admit, I would probably get the Sportage or the Sorento over this because they are bigger, a bit more comfortable, and they're not really going to cost you much more, at least in the base trims. Let me know about that, and I'll see all of you next week.